Hey everybody, it's Carrie and Kim with The Good Life, and we understand that in life there are 7 big areas of decision making that we all have to make that will make or break our lives. And today we're going to launch a series on one of those important areas.
Yes, and we know that we're approaching New Year's. Already you're seeing in your social media feeds all of the new diets and goal setting and Peloton commercials
Yeah.
because it's all about change.
And professional development, or read
Yeah.
this book this year, or these books will change your life. And I think that those are all super important. And it's good to have goals. It's good to pursue growth. But apart from what we're going to talk about and introduce today, all of those things are, I think, a little less important
Right.
than this. So one of the big areas of decision making is this thing we call attitude.
Yeah.
And attitude will make or break your life. And I've seen it. I remember reading a Chuck Swindoll quote on attitude. And in that quote, he says that this is the one string that we have to play on, is our attitude. That we can't control people, we can't control circumstances, but the one thing we can control is our attitude. And I was skeptical about that. But the older I got and the more I worked with people and worked with myself, the more I saw that he was absolutely right. It is the one string that we have to play on. And I'm looking at the scriptures in Numbers 13 and in that area, and Moses is sending out spies to the promised land, and they're getting ready to prepare themselves as a nation to launch into their destiny and to conquer the promised land. And so the spies go out. You remember how many spies?
There were 12 spies.
Yeah, 12 spies, which is too big of a committee. It was one of, I think, Moses' leadership mistakes. But he wanted everybody represented, so all the tribes got somebody. And then they all went out and they saw this great land flowing with milk and honey and just very prosperous. And then they came back, and Moses was super important. He was excited to have them speak, tell us about it, inspire us, tell us all about the promised land. And that was, I think, his second mistake. He should have had the meeting before the meeting, but instead he gave him the microphone right away.
Right.
And 2 of them had a good report, and 10 of them didn't.
Had a bad report.
Yeah, and so we always remember the names of the 2 that had a good report, but we forgot the other 10 losers' names. And really, the only difference was their attitude. They all saw the same land. The difference wasn't in their talent level or their upbringing or even what tribe they came from. Didn't make that big of a difference. The difference between those who entered into the promised land and those who stayed back and died in the wilderness was attitude.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that story really does show us is they all saw the same thing. They all went to the same place, but they came back with different perspectives, and they had to make a choice in that moment. And I think that's probably the biggest reality for me that I've had to learn. I tend to maybe sometimes see the glass half empty and to have to see the negative instead of the positive. And I've had to learn that attitude is really a choice. And I can choose to be bitter about something, or I can choose to, despair over a situation that I'm walking through. Or I can shed the light of God's word on that truth or on that situation and bring in the truth that helps me to say, okay, with God, there really is a different perspective.
Yeah. I wish there were a lot of things different in the world, and this would be one of them. I wish that if I'm in a mode of self-pity or hopelessness or ungratefulness or selfishness, I wish the world would just kind of bend and cater to me in those moments. But the fact is that if I'm selfish or
I'll let you know.
Or pitying, yeah, thank you, you're good at that. If I'm in one of those modes, it's because I choose to.
Yeah.
I choose to stay in that. And this fact that my attitude, which is my outlook on life, is my choice.
And it doesn't mean bad things don't happen and don't affect us. Obviously, we can't control situations, people, and circumstances. But really, we have to make a decision that even in those times and those seasons of pain or challenge, that we still have to operate allowing God to shed his light on that situation.
Yeah, there's so many people that are waiting for the next big thing to happen in their lives so that they can finally be happy. If they would just understand the power of this concept, and again, it took me a while. I wasn't raised understanding this. It took me a while to learn this, that my attitude is my choice, and the world around us isn't always rosy,
Right.
but what helps me choose my positive attitude is perspective.
Right.
And I think as a young person, especially young people today, are often very limited in their perspective for two reasons. One, as a young person, you don't have experience.
Right.
And so you're limited just by your time on the planet.
Mm-hmm.
But the other thing, growing up in this generation, their world is so curated for them. If you're below 25 years old, you've had that phone, and the internet algorithm has catered to you all your life, and your playlists have been catered to you, and you could stream whatever you want. It's just been catered to you. Everything's just kind of handed to you. And in the real world, it just doesn't bend to us like that. But what happens is that feedback loop becomes an echo chamber, and we are only hearing voices that kind of agree with us. And that's dangerous because it limits perspective. Now, when I'm in those modes where I'm adopting a negative attitude, what helps me get out of this is a change of perspective. I'll give you an example. My first car that I ever got, my parents gave me, it was one that was handed down through our family lineage. It seemed like my cousins had it, and then I finally got it. Was a silver Ford Pinto.
Nice.
Now, if you know anything about the Ford Pinto, it explodes if you hit it in the rear end. And later I learned that. I just wondered if my parents liked me or wanted me around or not. But anyway, I had this Pinto, and I dubbed it my Ferrari, and we drove it all over creation. And since that time, since I was 16, I'd always had a car until my senior year in college. And, my parents blessed me with cars, and I was able to drive right when I went to school. But then finally, the last car I had there in college, it broke. And I couldn't fix it. I sold it for scrap. And I didn't have a lot of extra money when I was in college. And so there was a season of my life where I had to walk. I had to take public transportation. And this is actually a true story. I had to ride my bike 10 miles each way to work. Now, it wasn't uphill both ways.
Or in a snowstorm.
No, and I wasn't barefoot. I did get pulled over by the police on my bicycle. That's a different story. Riding home from work one morning. And when you live life without a car, any car is appreciated.
Right. Yeah.
And so that helped change my perspective. I never looked down on people who were driving vehicles that looked a little more humble, which I spent most of my life driving humble vehicles. But man, if that thing moved forward, I was pretty happy.
It's faster than the bike.
Yeah, I had a car, I think, that if you put it in reverse, you couldn't get it out of reverse. And so there's something with the transmission linkage. So I was just happy if the thing went forward, and you always had to look for a parking space where you never had to back out. And so that experience changed my perspective, which now helps me to change my attitude when I'm not driving the exact car that I want.
I think for me that has really been a game changer too. I mean, I'm going to be honest. One of the things that I hate the most is doing laundry and doing dishes. But to sometimes step back from the mundane and I've got to do this again, but realize, what, God has blessed me. He's given me provision. I have clothes, thank God I have clothes. Thank God I have food and dishes to wash. And now that doesn't always feel the greatest in the moment.
Yeah, if you think about it, a big pile of dirty dishes is kind of a monument to God's provision. I remember being in a foreign country, and I watched this little girl. She couldn't have been more than 9 years old, come out of her little mud hut and start a fire on this single burner wood stove and begin to cook a small meal for her family. And that was the only stove that they had. They didn't have an abundance of dishes. They didn't have an abundance of food. And again, those experiences help shift perspective.
That's good.
And taking out the garbage is a monument to God's provision. We have so much waste in our world because we have an abundance in our world.
Does that mean you're going to take out the garbage?
I take out the garbage.
When do you take out the garbage?
Okay, we're going to cut this right now. Anyway, the point is, perspective helps change your attitude.
Yeah.
It helps change that. So I guess the action steps for you would be this. Practice choosing your attitude. Mm-hmm. Recognize these 5 fatal attitudes that we'll cover throughout this series: selfishness, ungratefulness, hopelessness, playing the victim or the victim mentality, self-pity. These are fatal attitudes that will keep you from becoming everything God has for you. Yeah. And so begin to understand first that your attitude is a choice Two, that perspective shifts help bring clarity. And when you see things from a perspective of reality, that God is for you and that he is providing for you and that he is there to help us, then you can rest in that. And then the second thing I would say as far as action steps is just to change a couple words in your vocabulary. First, change got to get to. Got to get to. So instead of, oh, I've got to go to work, say, no, I get to go to work.
I have a job.
Yeah, God has blessed me with a job, and you may not enjoy that job particularly, but if you change your attitude about it, it'd be surprising how often and what you say about your job, because the tongue is a rudder, you'd be surprised at how much you begin to enjoy it and you see the good in it. So instead of saying, oh, I've got to go to school, say, I get to go to school. Because I remember being in another country and a young boy was not allowed to go to school because he had a stuttering problem. And in their worldview, somehow that was an insurmountable problem. And this boy wanted to go to school. He would have loved to be in America studying in American schools, but he wasn't allowed to. And that helped me see education is a blessing and it's an opportunity for us. And in America, we have 12 years of free education. Yeah. And so instead of saying, I got to go to work or I've got to go to school, just change it to I get to. And just using that word to help frame perspective. And then also the other word I would change is I would add this word called yet. So if you're struggling, say, oh, I'm struggling with math. I don't get it. Yet. Or I don't have the job that I want. Yet. Because that word yet adds hope to your world. Right. That you're not finished yet. The last chapter isn't written in your life yet. And so God is still working out his call and his plan in our lives. And so as we close this session, attitude is a choice to help choose your attitude, understand perspective, and then change get to from got to, and then add yet to any sentence where it's not, the work's not quite finished yet.